I balanced the warm casserole in my hands as I climbed the steps to Evan's house. Sunday dinners were supposed to mean family, the kind of comfort I had always imagined carrying into old age. The door swung open before I could knock, and I stepped inside, greeted not by warmth, but by Marla's voice, sharp and cutting. "Who invited that old woman?" She said, her lips curling just enough to let the words hang heavy in the air. The conversation in the living room stalled. A couple of Evan's colleagues turned their heads, smirking, like they had been handed a secret joke. My heart tightened. Evan was standing near the mantel, a drink in his hand, and for one breathless moment, I waited for him to speak up, to clear the air, to remind them who I was. Instead, he looked down at the glass, as though it suddenly needed all his attention. The casserole weighed more than it had a moment ago. I forced a smile, the same polite mask I had worn through years of hard work and compromise. "I just thought I'd bring something to share," I murmured, setting the dish on the counter. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. Marla had already turned back toward her guests, her voice rising with laughter at something trivial, as if I weren't standing right there in the doorway of a home I had helped them secure. I straightened my shoulders, brushed invisible dust from my sleeve, and walked back toward the door. The hum of conversation resumed behind me, rising like a tide that had never carried me along with it. Outside, the evening air was cool, the sky turning a faint gray as dusk settled over the street. I drove home in silence, hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. My townhouse came into view, modest, but mine, every corner still carrying the echo of choices I had made for myself. I set down my keys, the silence greeting me like an old friend. It was in that quiet that I realized something had shifted, and by the next morning, my routines felt heavier, more deliberate, as though every act of living alone was preparing me for a decision I had never intended to make. The next morning, I rose at 6, just as I always did. The sun filtered through the thin curtains in my kitchen, and I brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to keep the silence company. I poured it into the same chipped mug I'd used for years, sat at the small table by the window, and let the steam curl against my face. This townhouse has been mine for nearly a decade, modest, but steady 2 bedrooms I keep tidy, one for sleeping and one for books. The walls carry no judgment, no whispered insults, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. After coffee, I pulled on my shoes and walked to the library where I volunteer 3 mornings a week, sorting returned books, reading to children on Thursdays, chatting with other retirees. It gives me rhythm, the kind of routine that holds a person together. But as I shelved a row of biographies, my mind kept slipping back to last night, to Marla's words, to Evan's silence. By the time I got home, I was restless, so I opened the drawer of my desk, where I keep my most important papers. I unfolded the deed to their house, the one on Westfield Drive. My name was still there, etched in black ink alongside Evan's. Years ago, after my husband died, I used the insurance money to help Evan buy that house. I insisted on certain protections, life estate trust clauses, things my lawyer had explained in careful detail. At the time, it felt like a formality, a safety net in case the unexpected ever came. Evan never asked about the paperwork again. Marla likely never looked. To them, the house has always been theirs, a symbol of their upward climb. To me, it has always been a reminder. Generosity should never erase common sense. I smoothed the papers back into their envelope, placed it in the drawer, and closed it gently. They thought they were the only ones with power, but I knew better, and soon enough, their assumptions would meet the truth I had been keeping all along. I can still picture the first time Marla told me to call ahead. I had stopped by with a pie, thinking it would be a nice surprise. She opened the door just wide enough to lean against the frame and said, "Next time, please call first. We like to keep our weekends planned." Her smile was polite, but her eyes had already dismissed me. After that, Evan echoed the same sentiment. Mom, it's better if you don't just drop by. Marla gets stressed when things aren't scheduled. He said it as though I were some neighbor overstaying my welcome, not the woman who had given him everything she could. The little changes came quickly after. Family photos that once hung in their hallway disappeared, replaced by glossy prints from their vacations. When I asked about the framed picture of Evan as a boy fishing with his father, Marla said, "We're just redecorating. Your things are safe in storage." Storage turned out to be a set of boxes stacked in their garage, my life labeled in black marker like leftovers. Even the simplest gestures became tests of my worth. Once I asked for a glass of water while sitting in their kitchen. Marla sighed loudly, as if I'd asked her to wash the entire house. "Evan, your mother needs water again," she muttered, sliding the glass across the counter without meeting my eyes. The message was clear. I was tolerated, not welcomed. Each visit left me feeling smaller, as though my presence was a burden they endured out of obligation rather than love. I told myself to overlook it, to choose peace over pride. But the weight of it grew heavier every time. I began to dread the invitations that came less and less often, each one a reminder that I was no longer part of the family's center. The silence of my townhouse felt kinder than their company, and yet I kept trying, hoping for something that no longer existed. That hope finally cracked when I overheard words that made all the sighs and eye rolls pale in comparison. When I think back on the years that shaped Evan's life, they are measured not in celebrations, but in what I gave up to keep him moving forward. I remember standing at the counter of a pawn shop, slipping my wedding ring across the glass. The man behind it weighed it casually, never knowing it carried my whole history. I told myself it was worth it. Evan's tuition was due, and he wanted to finish his degree without dropping classes. I walked out with a check in my purse and an emptiness on my finger that never truly faded. Later, when he and Marla wanted to buy their first house, the numbers didn't add up. Evan called me late one night, panic in his voice, saying they'd lose the contract if he couldn't come up with the down payment. I picked up extra bookkeeping shifts, sitting at a desk until my eyes blurred, reconciling accounts for small businesses that could barely afford me. Every dollar I earned went straight into their future, while I told myself I didn't need vacations or even a new winter coat. And then came Tyler. When Marla was bedridden with complications, I moved into their home for weeks. I cooked, cleaned, and rocked that baby through long nights, whispering lullabies while Marla slept and Evan tried to keep up with work. I remember thinking, as I pressed a cool cloth to Marla's forehead, that maybe she would one day see me as more than an obligation. Maybe she would understand. Those sacrifices felt natural, then almost automatic. That's what mothers do. I told myself they give until there's nothing left to give. But now, when I'm met with sighs for asking for water or laughter at being called an old woman, the weight of those memories presses against my chest. Every insult lands heavier because it collides with the years I spent bending over backward for them. I sat alone at my kitchen table, my hands curled around my coffee cup, and wondered how much longer I could carry a burden that no one else even acknowledged. It was in that stillness that I realized the pattern was never going to stop. It was only going to get worse. The call came on a Wednesday evening, just as I was rinsing my coffee cup and setting it in the rack. Evan's name lit up the screen, and for a moment I thought, maybe he was calling to check on me to bridge the space that had been growing wider between us. "Mom," he started, his voice low, almost rehearsed. "Maybe it's best if you give us a little more space. We'll invite you for holidays, of course, but Marla feels it's easier this way." I pressed the phone closer to my ear, waiting for him to soften the blow, to tell me it wasn't as cold as it sounded. Instead, Marla's voice slid into the line, crisp and unapologetic. "It's easier if you just let us handle family gatherings. You've done enough. We'll keep things organized. Done enough. The words cut deeper than she knew. I had done everything more than they would ever remember, and now I was being told my presence was no longer needed. I kept my voice steady. I see. Well, thank you for letting me know. I ended the call before either of them could say more. The quiet of my townhouse rushed in, thick and unforgiving. I leaned against the counter, my hand trembling just slightly, as I set the phone down. The kitchen light flickered above me, casting a shadow over the stack of unpaid bills on the table, reminders of how carefully I had always balanced life to make sure Evan never went without. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and stared at the wood grain beneath my fingertips. Don't plan around me, I whispered into the empty room. My voice sounded foreign strong in a way I hadn't heard from myself in years. I straightened my lips, tightening as the thought formed fully. Plan around the deed. The words lingered in the air long after I spoke them. Sharper than any confrontation I had ever managed face to face. And when the phone buzzed again with another call, I had no interest in answering. I knew that something inside me had shifted for good. The email landed in my inbox late in the afternoon. At first glance, I thought Evan had finally written to me directly. The subject line read, "Follow up on the loan tied to the Vale property." My stomach tightened. I clicked it open and realized almost immediately it wasn't meant for me at all. The message was a transcript of a voicemail from a banker addressed to Evan, just checking in on the loan documents tied to the Vale property. "We'll need the updated collateral verification this week." It was clear Evan had meant to forward it to Marla, but his careless finger had sent it to me instead. I read it twice then, a third time, trying to make sense of it. Loan, collateral, Vale property. That was the house on Westfield Drive, the one I had helped them buy, the one where Marla had told me I wasn't welcome. My name was still tied to it. I knew that much. But if they were using it for a loan, then they were gambling with something that wasn't fully theirs. I rose from my chair and went straight to the drawer in my study where I kept the heavy manila folder. Dust clung to the edges, but inside the papers were pristine, the deed, the trust documents, the life estate agreement. My signature sat there beside Evan's, a quiet reminder of the protection I had insisted on years ago. The language was clear, sharper now than it had been when my lawyer first explained it. Control of the property remained mine as long as I lived. My hands shook as I replaced the documents, not from fear, but from the clarity settling over me. Evan and Marla thought they had free rein, but the truth was written in ink they had never bothered to read. I closed the drawer, softly, sat back in my chair, and let the weight of the discovery settle. For the first time in years, the power was mine, and I knew exactly who I would call next. The next morning, I made an appointment with Ms. Calhoun, the attorney who had guided me through the maze of paperwork all those years ago. Her office hadn't changed, same oak desk, same tidy shelves stacked with leather-bound books. She listened carefully as I slid the forwarded message across the table and explained what I had found. She adjusted her glasses, scanned the page, and then looked up at me with calm certainty. "Corinne, they can't touch it. Your life estate is intact, and the trust clauses give you authority. If you want to sell that house tomorrow, Evan and Marla can't stop you." The words settled over me like a cloak of protection. For so long I had felt powerless in their hands, but here was proof that the control had been mine all along. My chest rose with a steady breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "I want to move forward," I told her, quietly. Within hours, the wheels were in motion. Ms. Calhoun arranged for an appraiser to walk through the property, followed by an inspector to note every detail. I stayed in the background, letting professionals do their work, making sure not a whisper of it reached Evan or Marla. The less they knew, the better. Driving home that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. The insults, the dismissive glances, the boxes of my memories shoved into garages, they no longer bound me. The law had given me a pen, and for once I wasn't afraid to use it. That night, I sat in my own living room with a cup of coffee, the lamp casting a soft glow over the photographs I had chosen to keep on display. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and pictured what it would feel like when the house on Westfield Drive no longer tied me to their contempt. For the first time in years, the thought of freedom felt real, and I knew the next step would carry me even closer to it. The listing went live on a Thursday morning. By the time I finished my second cup of coffee, the phone had already rung twice. By early afternoon, Ms. Calhoun called to say an investor had made a full cash offer. No haggling, no delays, just a clean line from listing to sale. I thought I might hesitate, that maybe my hand would tremble when it came time to decide. But when the papers slid in front of me, I signed without a pause. The pen felt steady in my grip, my name flowing across the page as if it had been waiting years to claim this moment. When I left her office, the sky seemed brighter, though the weather hadn't changed. I drove home slowly, savoring the quiet hum of the engine. The way each passing block felt like distance placed between me and the years of disrespect I had endured. At home, I put my keys in the bowl by the door and looked around my modest townhouse. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, in a way no other place could ever be. I set to work almost immediately, dusting the shelves, rearranging the furniture, and pulling out the framed photographs I had once tucked away in a drawer after Marla had declared them out of style. I hung Evan's childhood photo back on the wall, the one of him grinning with a missing front tooth, holding up the fish he caught with his father. I placed my parents' wedding portrait on the mantel, its glass newly polished. Each picture returned to its place felt like a piece of myself settling back where it belonged. As evening fell, I lit the small lamp in the corner of the living room. Its glow spread softly across the walls, chasing away the shadows that had lingered there too long. I sank into my chair with a quiet sigh, the day's decision still warm in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt whole in my own home, and I knew it was only a matter of time before Evan and Marla discovered what I had done. It didn't take long. By the weekend, there was a knock at my door, sharp enough to rattle the frame. When I opened it, Evan stood there, pale and frantic, Marla just behind him, her eyes wide with panic. They didn't wait for an invitation. "Mom," Evan blurted, his voice cracking. "What have you done?" "There's a sign in the yard, sold. People walking through our house talking about paint colors. How could you? Our house I cut in, keeping my tone even. You mean the house I put my money into, the house I never signed away?" Marla stepped forward, clutching her phone like it might rescue her. "You don't understand. We had a deal, a loan that depended on the property. Without it, the bank." She stopped, her throat tightening. Evan rubbed the back of his neck, his movements jerky. "The loan's collapsing. If we can't cover it, we'll lose everything. Foreclosure, repossession. It's all coming down. Please, Mom. You have to help us." I let their words hang in the room, their panic filling the silence. Once I would have rushed to save them, opening my checkbook before they finished asking. But not this time. I folded my hands on the table and spoke softly, so there could be no mistaking my meaning. "I'm not your safety net. I'm your mother." The words seemed to strike harder than any refusal of money. Evan's face flushed, his mouth opening and closing with nothing to say. Marla stared at me as though I had transformed into someone she'd never met. "You can't just abandon us," Evan whispered finally. "I didn't abandon you," I said. "I stopped allowing you to abandon me." They left soon after, no longer demanding, just broken and uncertain. I watched them walk down the path, their shoulders bent under the weight of consequences they had chosen. When the door shut behind me, the house fell quiet again, and I knew the next time we spoke, the balance of power between us would never be the same. In the weeks that followed, I poured my energy into the townhouse. The walls had grown dull over the years, so I hired a painter to freshen them with soft, warm tones. I bought new curtains that let in the morning light and replanted the small patch of garden out back, filling it with blooms that promised color through the seasons. Every change felt like a statement, a reminder that this place was mine and worth caring for. One afternoon, I sat at my desk with a pen in hand, and my will spread before me. I crossed out old plans and wrote in new ones. The modest savings I had, along with what remained from the sale, I directed toward a nonprofit that offered housing and support for older women. It felt fitting. I wanted my story to end in generosity, but on my terms, not through exploitation. It was almost a month later when Evan came to my door alone. He looked tired, the lines on his face deeper than I remembered. I let him in, and he stood awkwardly in my living room, glancing at the freshly painted walls. "Mom," he began, his voice low. "I'm sorry. For everything. I should have defended you. I should have remembered what you've done for me." I listened, my hands resting in my lap. The apology sounded genuine, but I had learned not to confuse remorse with change. "I appreciate that," I said evenly, "but understand this. I won't be treated like I don't matter again." He nodded slowly, eyes cast down. When he finally looked up, I gave him the words that had sat on my tongue since the day Marla mocked me in my own house. "Next time, invite the woman who bought the roof over your head." Silence stretched between us, not hostile, just heavy with truth. Evan left soon after, and I was alone again. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. The morning sun poured across the surface, warming my hands as I lifted the mug. For the first time in years, peace felt like it belonged to me.